It was a grey, chilly Toronto morning when the housekeeper arrived at 50 Old Connolly Road at 8:30 a.m. on December 15, 2017. It was a big house in one of Toronto's richest neighborhoods owned by Barry Sherman, a billionaire pharmaceutical drug tycoon, and his wife Honey. The first thing the housekeeper noticed were the newspapers outside the front door. Strange, she thought to herself. That wasn't like Barry or Honey. Honey's aging gold Lexus SUV was in its usual spot by the side door. So she used her key to open the door. Now normally she had to disarm the alarm, but this morning the alarm was not set. The housekeeper would later tell police that when she entered that house that day, she felt something black, like something heavy was in the air. The house was quiet, no signs of Barry or Honey. Shrugging it off, she got to cleaning. She headed upstairs to see if the Shermans were in bed. The master bedroom's bed was made, but not the way that Honey normally did it. She wondered if the Shermans even had gone to sleep the previous night. Regardless, there was no sign of them. She proceeded to the bathroom and found the sink dry. Again, odd. If Honey had been home, she would have at least used the sink. The housekeeper then found Honey's cell phone on the floor of a bathroom on the main floor of the house. This was also weird because Honey never used this bathroom. And why was her phone on the floor? Besides, if her cell phone was there, where was Honey? The housekeeper picked the phone up and laid it on the vanity. Around the same time as the housekeeper arrived, the couple's personal trainer had also arrived. She came over on Fridays to do a little workout with Honey and Barry. Also around the same time, a maintenance man showed up to do regular service on the furnaces for the house. He grabbed his tools and headed into the basement to the furnace room. He would later say he thought the house felt weird, and that he was surprised to see lights on and doors open because the ever-frugal Honey was always complaining about the lights being on and the doors being open. Moreover, Honey usually called something down the stairs to him before he got to his work. This morning, there was no sign of Honey. An hour later, the trainer and the maintenance man were gone. On his way out, the maintenance man noticed frozen footprints on the partially frozen ramp to the underground garage. They looked old, he thought. Next, around 10:45 a.m., a real estate agent who was working for the Shermans arrived at the house to show the house to prospective buyers. See, the house was up for sale for $6.9 million. The Shermans were building a new house in another Toronto neighborhood. The Shermans were not home, which really didn't matter to the agent, but she did see Honey's cell phone in one of the bathrooms and wondered, if her phone was there, then where was Honey? Anyway, another agent arrived with two clients to view the house. They started their tour upstairs, they looked at the main floor, and then they headed downstairs to the basement to see the underground pool. On their way through the long hallway leading to the pool, by a door that led to the underground garage, the real estate agent looked down and saw driving gloves and the home inspection report that she had asked Barry to bring home the night before. Also on the floor was Barry's BlackBerry. So she reached down and picked up the gloves, papers, and phone, and was thinking to herself, how odd. Here I am trying to sell their house, and he's just dropping stuff all over the floor. With the other realtor and clients in tow, she continued down the long hallway to the swimming pool room. The overhead lights were not on, but the underwater pool lights were, which created a dim, eerie glow. The real estate agent was about to turn the lights on to the pool room when she looked to the far end of the pool and saw Barry and Honey Sherman sitting by the railing of the pool, leaning backwards. At first glance, she thought, are they doing some weird yoga pose? But then she thought to herself, no, this doesn't look right. She had no idea what she was looking at, but she knew it wasn't right. She turned immediately and hustled the other realtor and clients out the door, saying that we'll be in touch. She locked the door and summoned the housekeeper. The realtor asked the housekeeper to go downstairs and check out what she had just seen, but the housekeeper said she was too afraid. As they are discussing what to do, the gardener arrived. Even though it was winter, the Shermans have her come over a few times a week to water their plants. So the housekeeper let the gardener in, and they told her what the real estate agent had just seen, telling her that there was something terribly, terribly wrong with the Shermans downstairs. The gardener said she wasn't afraid and went to the basement to see what was going on. Meanwhile, while the gardener went downstairs, the real estate agent decided to call Mary Shetman, Honey's sister and best friend, who was in Florida. Mary had only left for Florida the day before, and she had last spoken to Honey on the Wednesday, 2 days before, and it was just a quick phone call. So the gardener went into the swimming pool room and walked right up to the Shermans. She didn't touch them though, and she immediately turned on her heels and headed back upstairs shaking and said that the Shermans were blue and clearly dead. The real estate agent relayed this to Mary, who told her to call 911. So the real estate agent called 911 at 11:45 a.m. on December the 15th, 2017. She said, "Somebody has killed my clients. They are dead." The fire department was the first to arrive after the 911 calls, but within a few hours, a team of forensic officers were going through the house. Welcome back to Unjust Crimes. My name is Michelle, and today I'm going to be telling you the story of the unsolved murders of Barry and Honey Sherman of Toronto, Ontario, Canada. This is quite a new case, just over 7 years old, and I do remember seeing this in the news, and I didn't really think much else about it at the time other than, wow, this doesn't happen too often in Canada. And I guess you could say that I loosely followed the case throughout the years, and I knew that it was a story that I was going to eventually want to tell, but I also knew that this case was very complicated and had a lot of information. Not only information, but the case is so full of intrigue, money, scandals, and so many conspiracy theories. I went down way too many rabbit holes on this one. So I started off really trying to make this into a nice little condensed story that I could tell in about an hour. And I tried to condense this to that point, but I kept finding that I was losing important information. So after many failed attempts, I just realized to tell this story, I had to tell pretty much everything I have found in my research, and there was no way that I could do that in one part. So this is part 1 of, I hope, only 2, but possibly more, of the unsolved murders of Barry and Honey Sherman. At the time of his death in 2017, financial media outlets estimated the Sherman wealth to be between 3.5 to 4 billion Canadian dollars. But sources closer to the family have said that if you added together all of Barry's assets, investments, and so on, he was worth closer to 10 billion Canadian dollars, which ranked him the 15th richest man in Canada. Barry was born Bernard Charles, or Barry Sherman, on February 25, 1942, and grew up in a middle-class household in the Forest Hill neighborhood of Toronto, Ontario, Canada. He was born into a Jewish family to Herbert Dick Hyman Sherman, a business partner for a zipper company, and Sarah Sherman, who became an occupational therapist after her husband and Barry's father passed away. Barry's grandparents from both sides had fled persecution of Jews in Russia and Poland. Barry was just 10 years old when his father died from a heart attack, and his life changed quite a bit from the nice middle-class childhood that he had been used to, as his mother then had to go to work, and she also had to take in boarders to make ends meet. As a child, Barry was described as lethargic by his teachers, even though it was clear that he was a smart child. By high school, Barry had realized that he was really good at taking tests. He won a national physics contest while attending the Forest Hill Collegiate Institute and graduated with top marks in all of Ontario. In the summer of 1958, he signed up for a Canadian Army organized student militia, but quickly found out that he didn't like it. And the same year, he entered the University of Toronto, or the U of T's, Engineering Sciences program at age 16. Actually, he was one of the youngest students ever to join the university's engineering science program. He later wrote in his unpublished memoir that he chose that program specifically because it was reputably the university's hardest. During his summers at university, Barry needed a job, so he would work for his uncle Lou Winter, who was his mother's younger brother. Lou was a biochemist and was doing very well for himself. He owned a company called Empire Laboratories, which was then Canada's largest wholly owned generic pharmaceutical company. Barry worked as a driver, primarily picking up urine samples for pregnancy tests, and when his uncle would travel, Barry often helped watch over the operations. This job with his uncle Lou is where Barry learned the generic pharmaceutical business. Barry would later recall that his interest in business as a career was peaked, though, when he was only 10, when his father brought him to work one day at his zipper factory in downtown Toronto and gave Barry some zippers to count and box. He later wrote that his father was surprised at how well that he did, filling, quote, more than would have been done in the same time by any of his paid staff. Barry also recalled feeling insulted when his father counted them. So Uncle Lou and his wife Beverly had 4 young boys. The first was adopted as they believed they couldn't have their own children. Sure enough, not long after, 3 biological sons followed. The oldest boy was Tim, then came Jeffrey, Carrie, and Dana. You may be thinking, who cares? But it's a very important part of Barry's story, so hold on. Anyways, Barry graduated from the U of T in 1964 with the highest honors in his class and received the university's Governor General's Award for his thesis. He then enrolled at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, or MIT, from which he received a PhD in astrophysics in 1967. You know, Barry was a pretty smart cookie. In 1965, while still at MIT, Barry's Uncle Lou suddenly died of a brain aneurysm. 17 days later, his wife Beverly died from leukemia, leaving their 4 small children orphaned and Empire Labs being run by Royal Trust, who was in charge of handling the estate, and that included Empire Labs. By 1967, after completing his PhD, Barry, along with his best friend since they were 16, Joel Ulster, purchased Empire Labs from the executor of the estate of Lou Winter and his wife Beverly. Mind you here that Barry was not a pharmacist or a biochemist, he was a rocket scientist. But he had seen an opportunity, and that's something that Barry would become known for, taking gambles on businesses. And sometimes he lost millions, other times he made millions. So the Winters estate allowed Barry to buy a majority stake in Empire Labs and run it only on the one condition that the 4 Winter children would be allowed to work for the company when they reached 21, with the option to buy 5% stakes in the company 2 years later, with 15-year royalties on 4 of its patented products. The agreement would be voided if Barry sold Empire Labs. Now, I really don't know why that was there and why there wasn't a stipulation that a percentage or something had to go to the Winter children if the lab was sold. But anyway, in 1969, Barry, being keen like he was, worked out a deal to swap shares with Empire's largest customer, and that put them in control of the company, not him. Barry had a plan. When Barry bought Empire Labs, it was losing money and was not really being run very great. By 1971, he had turned the lab into a thriving lab, and it attracted the attention of bigger labs, and he got an offer, so he sold the business. And Barry was shrewd, something that he would also become very known for. One of the stipulations of the sale was that the major shareholders couldn't open a competing business. But remember, back in '69, he had worked out a deal to swap his majority shares with Empire's largest customer, so that put them in control of the company, not him. So through this loophole, once Empire Labs was sold, Barry was free and clear to start his own generic pharmaceutical lab. A little underhanded? Or very smart. Both, I'd say. So in January of 1972, Barry sold Empire Labs. And this sale also avoided his arrangement with the Winter estate, meaning that he didn't owe the Winter children anything, basically. Like I said, I'm not really sure why the Winter estate didn't put some sort of stipulation in place where if the lab sold, then the percentage had to go to the Winter children or something, but it didn't, and Barry was in the clear. Again, underhanded? Probably. Definitely. I think my conscience would have made me give so much of the sale to the estate for the children. But that's also probably why I'll never be a billionaire. A year later, so 1973, Barry started Apotex with former Empire Labs personnel, and well, the rest is history. This privately owned and Sherman-controlled company claimed to be Canada's largest domestic pharmaceutical manufacturer. Barry also became involved in and personally invested in many other non-pharmaceutical businesses. Some say his business ventures could be counted in the hundreds. Everything from a beer company, to funding movies for a friend, to a juice company, to real estate, to a nap, you name it. Fast forward many years, and by 2016, Apotex employed over 10,000 people with over 260 products selling in over 115 countries, and revenues were about $1.5 billion annually. Anna Deborah Honey Reich was born on January 25, 1947, in Austria in a displaced persons camp. Her parents were both survivors of the Holocaust. They were imprisoned in a slave labor camp by the Nazis in Poland and somehow managed to survive the Second World War. When they were liberated, they were taken to a displaced persons camp in Austria in 1947, and that's where Honey was born. She was the daughter of Naftuli and Helen Reich, and eventually the family did move to Toronto, Ontario, Canada, and Honey also had a younger sister named Mary. Honey and Mary were best friends, and Mary has said that Honey's job her whole life was to take care of Mary, which she did, as well as Mary's children. Being the child of Jewish Holocaust survivors formed a big part of who Honey was. She was very involved in the Jewish community in Toronto. A lifelong friend of Honey's has said that her mother was very critical and had very high expectations of Honey. Her mother was described as a tyrant who was very harsh, particularly on Mary, whom Honey shielded from their mother's verbal abuse. Honey's father was said to be described as being quiet and very immersed in the war, and that he may have been really struggling to make sense of the trauma associated with his experiences. Both Honey and Mary were under the instruction of parents who had been through the war to be very careful, do not spend too much money, don't buy fancy clothes, and so on, and that really shaped who Honey was as a person. They say when you come from the Holocaust, the drive and ambition to be successful was huge, and Honey did that. She did well in high school, and she entered Teachers College, where she also did very well. After college, she took a teaching job and volunteered as a candy striper at Mount Sinai Hospital in Toronto. She told a friend, a nurse at the hospital, Joel Ulster's ex-wife, remember Joel, who was Barry's best friend? Anyway, Honey said that she wanted to meet a Jewish doctor. The friend said, I have the perfect person for you. He's a doctor, not an MD, but a PhD. And by August of 1970, when Honey Reich was introduced to Barry Sherman, he was rapidly on his way to becoming a major force in generic pharmaceuticals. Almost exactly a year later, in 1971, the couple was married. While Barry worked long hours getting Apotex rolling, Honey taught elementary school. She'd often drive to Apotex after work and they'd share a takeout chicken dinner. The couple quickly became known in the Toronto scene for their philanthropy. Honey was very prominent in the Canadian philanthropy scene, serving on the boards of several charities. Together, the couple would have 4 children, Lauren born in 1975, and after several miscarriages, the couple's other 3 children were born by surrogacy, Jonathan in 1983, Alexandra in 1986, and Kaylin in 1990. The couple was said to be polar opposites personality-wise. Where Honey was gregarious, Barry could be aloof and lack social graces. And aside from both being U of T graduates and down-to-earth, frugal people, they were polar opposites. Barry was a self-described workaholic who bought business files with him on vacation. He was an atheist, an aggressive businessman, but a loving, though often absent father. Honey, on the other hand, was a social butterfly who loved to party. And while Barry did socialize regularly with Honey, he often kept to himself and discussed mainly his businesses, while Honey was more outgoing. So I've never come across 2 people with so many descriptors from one end of the spectrum to the other. And it's really hard to explain, but to get a sense of who Barry and Honey were, it really depends on who was describing them. To those who knew Barry, well, they said he was kind and generous to a fault. To others, mainly business associates of rival drug companies, they described him as aloof and arrogant. They also described him as having no redeeming qualities whatsoever, and the words that they would want to use to describe him could not be printed. Murray Rubin, who was friends with Barry for over 50 years, said, quote, Barry didn't care about things. Making money was a way of keeping score. Going on to say that Barry was, as a person, very gentle. As a businessman, very tough. Murray Rubin also said that Barry didn't care about money at all. He flew economy and drove his cars to the ground. In other words, Barry was very frugal. For his 50th birthday, for example, Honey gave him a red sports car with a bow on it. He asked her to take it back, and she did. I think the first thing you will hear or read about Barry Sherman is that he was a billionaire, that he was hard in business and unliked by his competitors. But like I said, his friends who knew him described him as a big-hearted guy who would help anybody. They said he was generous to a fault and a big believer in giving back. Jack Kay, who was Barry's second-in-command at Apotex and one of his best friends, said that Barry could be seen as arrogant, as he would correct your grammar, no matter who you were and even if you just met. But he was also humble and couldn't put on airs. With Barry, there was no bullshit. But this no bullshit attitude was either seen as an insult or a compliment, depending on who it was that was talking about Barry. But Barry was known to be all business, no small talk. Honey, on the other hand, was outgoing and more comfortable in social settings. She was at every charity event in the city very enthusiastically, and she had a wide circle of affectionate friends. Like Barry, there was 2 sides to Honey. Those who did not know her thought she was, well, an entitled bitch, because she would come off that way to people that she didn't know. A person close to Honey said that the way Honey spoke to people she didn't know was actually shocking, like they were beneath her. She would yell and speak to them as if she had no time for them. For instance, she would yell at waiters and order people around. Another source claims that if Honey walked into her favorite hair salon and someone was sitting in her chair, well, it wasn't long before they were moved. But to others, those who knew her really well, they say that this was Honey's bravado. They say that Honey didn't trust people very easily and she put her guard up, and this act of being rude and so on was, according to her friends, an act until she got to know you. Then when she let her guard down, she was this very loving and really funny person. Honey was known for her big personality, and if she was in the room, they say, you knew it. She was loud, she was abrasive, and she was blunt and honest. Like Barry, Honey was a big believer in giving back. According to her sister Mary, Honey never did forget where she came from. Also like Barry, Honey was known for being extremely frugal, and that was no doubt the result of her upbringing. Despite being one of the wealthiest families in Canada, Honey didn't waste anything, like nothing. For instance, the shorts that she wore to her workouts were decades old, and if they tore, she proudly sewed them herself. And she liked her calendars to be printed, but only on the back of an already used sheet of paper. Nothing went to waste. The couple did not live like you would expect billionaires to live. For instance, though their house was nice, it has been said that it was dated, that the electronics in the house were old and sometimes cheap. The couple both drove older cars. Barry's car was said to be a rust bucket that leaked carbon monoxide into the passenger side. And Honey was quoted as saying that they lived nice lives, not big lives. And it was very important for Honey to instill this in her children, and the fact that money was for needs, not wants. How successful she was in this, I am not really sure. But anyway, where Honey wanted to teach her children the value of money and working for it, Barry was more inclined to give the kids extraordinarily huge amounts of money. And this was a huge source of tension in the family, between Honey and Barry, but also between the siblings, because reportedly, the money was not given out evenly. Honey had put her foot down after the first two, Lauren and Jonathan, and told Barry to be more careful with the younger two, Alexandra and Kaylin. So how can you sum the couple up? Complicated, like most people are. Like, it really depends on who was talking about them. Sure, you've gathered by now that there were two sides to Barry Sherman, or what the National Post called the, quote, two legacies. And I think the same applies to Honey. Some people described Barry and Honey as kind, good people who were praised for their philanthropic giving. Others described Barry as having no redeeming qualities, or wanting to use unprintable language to describe him. Others said he was a deplorable human being, while others said that Honey was rude, she was loud, and she was an entitled bitch. Their friends say they were great. Strangers, not so much. And Barry's business rivals hated him. What I really find too bad is that the four kids have not really said much about their parents, except for Jonathan at their funeral, and a few things that he has said in an interview that he did. Granted, the children are very private people, so we have to respect that. But I would love to hear what they have to say, like actual quotes, not stuff that I have found about things that were allegedly going on with the family, but things that they actually said about their parents, what kind of people they were. That being said, allegedly the relationships within the family were not great, and the kids did not seem to have a very good relationship with Honey. All four kids did say that they were closer to their father than their mother. So as I've mentioned, the Shermans were known for their philanthropy and were big proponents of paying it forward. Though frugal in their own lives, the couple was very generous with their money, and their philanthropy has created a lasting legacy. They donated multiple millions of dollars to hospitals, Jewish organizations, universities, and charities like the United Way. A state-of-the-art research university facility in Toronto bears their name, as does a Jewish community center campus. Through its foundation, Apotex has also donated over $50 million in Canadian dollars around the world, including sending medicine to a children's charity in Kenya. And Honey was involved with a long list of organizations. I also read that in their lifetime, the Shermans had given away over $100 million to charity. But the billionaires didn't flaunt their wealth. They were described as being very down-to-earth and, again, extremely frugal. Honey did have nice things though, but frugality was everything. For example, she collected hotel body lotions and hand lotions. Not really what you would think that a billionaire would do. At the same time, though, she did have closets full of luxury items. She did love her purses, and she did love her shoes. She had nice clothes, and she also had nice jewelry, but she did not believe in waste. Neither of them drove a new car, and they bragged about getting work done on their cars for cheap. The couple, specifically Honey, had dealt with health issues. She was called the Bionic Woman for all her replacement parts. She had had back surgery, arthritis, a shoulder replacement, a knee replacement, a hip replacement, surgery to both feet, and throat cancer. Barry was said to take medication for high blood sugar as he was, quote, borderline diabetic. He had survived prostate cancer, and he also took sleeping medication as well as medication for cholesterol. One other thing that is important to understand about Barry is that, and I've mentioned it, that he was a very tough businessman, and he is known as the most litigious business owner of any industry in Canada. It has been reported that Apotex launched hundreds of lawsuits against competitors, including pharmaceutical giants like Pfizer and Merck & Company, to overturn patent protection for their medicines. They also launched hundreds of lawsuits against government regulators who made decisions that Apotex disagreed with. I actually read that Apotex was involved in over 1,200 lawsuits in its time. As a result, obviously, Barry gained a reputation for freely using the courts to defend his business interests, as well as build his company. His competitors despised him, and he was known as a fierce competitor, aggressively fighting Canadian patents and disqualifying them. Aubrey Dan, son of rival pharmaceutical giant Leslie Dan, said that Barry was always up for the fight against the brand name companies. Quote, "To be successful in business, one thing about Barry, and they have publicly stated this, you've got to be litigious. He was the underdog. He was fighting for the common man of making things affordable. Believe me, brand name companies did not want him around. The brand name companies detested Barry. Barry was one of the most aggressive, and Apotex, they would challenge all sorts of rulings by the government. A 1998 Toronto Star story described Apotex as a, quote, pit bull, constantly looking to expand its territory in the pharmaceutical world and fending off attacks by competitors. As you can imagine, this aggressive way of doing business, and often costing his competitors hundreds of millions of dollars, made Barry some enemies in the pharmaceutical industry. Barry's lawsuits weren't limited to Apotex, though. For instance, Barry and Honey ended up recouping $2 million of the contracted amount to construct their home after suing a number of the house's designers and builders. And this was the house that they had built on 50 Old Connolly Road back in 1985. There were plenty more lawsuits, but we'll get to them later, but to say that Barry was new to court is an understatement, and he pissed off a lot of people, both in the pharmaceutical industry and outside of it. Another thing that Barry reportedly did was, through one of the many companies he controlled, he had made substantial donations to a number of foundations he had established in his or Apotex's name. As a result, he was entitled to an equivalent tax credit under Canadian tax law. He was then allowed to borrow money back from the foundations, and he did, lending almost the entire $6 million he gave. In response, a private charity watchdog group called on Canadian lawmakers to change the law to prevent Barry from using his foundations as a piggy bank. I'm not sure if anything ever came from that, though. In 2017, the Shermans decided to sell their home on Old Connolly Road in North York and move to a new house that they were building in Forest Hill, which was closer to downtown Toronto, where many of their friends and business associates, as well as their daughter and grandchildren and Honey's sister Mary, lived. This was Honey's pet project. Barry, he didn't really want to move, but he let Honey have her way. They put the North York home on the market, asking almost $7 million. Something strange to know about the Shermans? They were not worried about security. They did have an alarm, and they did lock their doors, sometimes. Honey often left the side door open. Not really what you would expect from billionaires. And Barry was known to say, if they're going to get you, they're going to get you. Barry was involved in many businesses. Some say the number of businesses he was actually involved in numbers in the hundreds. And sometimes these businesses turned out to be fraudulent schemes. Jack Kay, his longtime second-in-command and best friend, told police, quote, Barry had no street smarts. He would sometimes be taken advantage of. And although Barry and Honey Sherman were billionaires and ranked among the richest people in Canada, they were not household names at all. It has only been since their murders that people have come to learn who they were. And who they were two very complicated people, like most people are, but they were people that had the added problems that being a billionaire brings, not something that most people have to deal with. Okay, so now that we have some background on the Shermans, let's start moving on to roughly the week of the murders. So on Saturday, December 9th, Honey had just returned from a trip to Miami in the United States. She was at home, and in the afternoon, one of her physical therapists was upstairs treating her in the master bedroom. The realtor who worked for the Shermans popped by to show the house. Barry was at Apotex, even though it was Saturday. The Apotex was in a difficult financial situation. There had been recent layoffs and more to come, and Barry was expecting to have to pay a $580 million judgment from a drug patent case in early January. It's almost Hanukkah, and daughter Alexandra is emailing her parents to make plans for a small get-together, a date that will change several times, for an event that will never happen actually, due to the murders. That afternoon, Alexandra emails her parents, copying her husband, quote, "Hi Mom and Dad, would you like to come over on Tuesday or Wednesday evening? We can light the Hanukkah candles with their child's name, and maybe you can bring us some egg-free latkes." On Sunday, December 10th, Honey, who was known to be a night owl and would reply to emails at all hours of the night, replied to Alexandra at 2:50 a.m., copying Barry and Alexandra's husband Brad. Quote, "Both work for me, Barry?" ? Now this year over the holidays, most of the family was planning on traveling. Lauren, the oldest, who lived with her son in British Columbia, was in Mexico, and Jonathan and his husband Fred McCure were winding down a trip to Japan. Though Barry is no hockey fan, the Toronto Maple Leafs were in town, and Barry and Honey joined their friends Leslie Gales and Keith Ray for dinner at the Hot Stove Lounge before the game that Sunday night. P.S. The notoriously cheap Barry and Honey did not have seats. They were guests of Leslie and Keith. On Monday, December the 11th, Sheila Stanley, who was Honey's personal assistant, arrived at 10 a.m. She works for Honey each day from about 10 a.m. in the morning till about 2:30 p.m. in the afternoon. She would later tell police that she manages Honey's schedule, makes her bill payments, and even helps Honey dress for events. The one major change to the week is that Honey's assistant has been given Thursday and Friday off because her family is heading for a winter vacation. The Shermans had only a few plans at the start of the week. Barry always attended Frank D'Angelo's Christmas lunch, which was scheduled for Tuesday. But this year he emailed D'Angelo, "Regret, can't do. Have a large meeting scheduled for noon December 12th. Now, Frank D'Angelo was one of Barry's business associates and close friends. Now, the meeting that Barry was talking about was to discuss plans for the $30 million home in Forest Hill that he and Honey were building. Joe Brennan and his team from Brennan Custom Homes were waiting to hear if the meeting would be at Apotex or the Sherman home. Meanwhile, daughter Alexandra wrote to her parents early Monday, copying her husband about their upcoming dinner plans. Quote, "Can we say tomorrow? ? Tuesday? ? Barry responded a few minutes later, okay. And Honey responded an hour later. Quote, "We have a dreidel." On Tuesday, December the 12th, Honey's personal assistant is working away at the Sherman house with Honey. Honey had lots of plans with friends, once she and later Barry would be in Florida starting the following week. Old Connolly Road is filled with painters who were primping the house for a Wednesday showing. There's an offer in, but it's too low. Honey missed a meeting of the Baycrest Center Foundation board without notifying them beforehand, which was unusual for her. Reached by email, she simply said she was, quote, "dealing with some stuff." The architects' meeting is switched from Tuesday to Wednesday to be held at Apotex. Meanwhile, Barry is at the office. Now, this is the night for the Hanukkah dinner, but in the afternoon, Honey emails Alexandra, quote, "Could we have Hanukkah on Friday? Just found some eggless recipes for latkes on the net. Could make them Friday in order to celebrate. Could also drop by today, Tuesday, or tomorrow, Wednesday, but without the latkes. Please let us all know what you prefer." And then she asked for some gift suggestions. Alexandra wrote her mother back, quote, "Can we hold off on tonight's visit and just see you on Friday?" She thanked her mom for going to the trouble, due to her child's food allergy, of making egg-free latkes. Quote, "I know it's a hassle, and it means a lot to us." Also in the works in the early part of the week were plans for Barry and Honey to attend a Hanukkah event that coming Sunday with Kaylin's fiance's parents, and then to have dinner that night with the Ulsters in Toronto. Remember Joel Ulster, that was Barry's best friend going back to Forest Hill Collegiate? Late that Tuesday evening, son Jonathan and husband Fred arrived back from their trip to Japan, jet-lagged. They went to their home in King City, arriving around 7 p.m. That night, Barry called Frank D'Angelo to apologize for missing the Christmas lunch. The morning of December 13th, 2017 was a regular, albeit busy day at the Sherman house. The house was teeming with activity because the house was up for sale and a showing was booked by prospective buyers. There were contractors doing paint touch-ups, the housekeeper was busy tidying for the showings, and the real estate agent was present. The day started with a morning workout. Honey, who was now 70, had a trainer come into the house a few times a week to work out with her and Barry, who was now 75. Barry had his workout at 8:30, and the trainer would tell the Toronto Star that Barry really didn't care for working out. He only did it because Honey wanted him to. The workout started by having breakfast, and he would take his time to use as much of the workout time as he could. And he would complain the whole entire workout session that this is stupid, and he would stop and look at his watch every 30 seconds. All in all, he never really did work out with any conviction. Barry went to get his shower at 9:30, so Honey's turn to work out was up next, and her session would last about 2 hours. Honey, aka the Bionic Woman, depended on these workouts to keep her going, and she worked out more vigorously than Barry did. After his shower, Barry came out proudly showing off a new belt that Honey had bought him. The ever-frugal Honey had bought 2 belts at Canadian Tire for $9.99 each. Barry was affectionate to Honey. He gave her a hug and kiss before heading off to work. On his way down the stairs, she called after him, "See you at 5. Putting on his coat, Barry promised the real estate agent that he'd bring home a marked-up copy of the Old Connolly Road inspection report, part of his plan to convince prospective buyers that the house was a steal. By 10 a.m., Barry was climbing into his 10-year-old rag-topped Mustang. He got to work around 10:30, and he had a busy day of meetings and a lot of paperwork that had to be caught up on. After Honey's workout, she had a masseuse that came in to do a 2-hour massage session. Then she showered, dressed, and before she left, she chatted with her longtime assistant, Sheila Stanley. Sheila would be off the following day, Thursday, and the Friday. In fact, nobody was scheduled to be at the Sherman house the next day, Thursday, December 14th, 2017. No personal trainers, no cleaners, and no showings were booked for the house. And this is significant proof to me that someone had an inside knowledge of the Sherman schedule. Sheila said that would be easy to do, actually, because Honey didn't have a password on any of her devices, and Barry's password was some combination of 1, 2, 3, 4. Honey left the house to run errands, and she visited with some friends. According to their trainer, both Honey and Barry were in great spirits that morning, and there was absolutely no tension between them. It was the start of Hanukkah, and Honey wanted to get gifts for her grandchildren. Jeremy Desai, Apotex's CEO, said he probably had the last meeting with Barry, and everything was business as usual. Jack Kay, Barry's second in command, had left at noon that Wednesday for a short trip to New York to see Andrea Bocelli. By 5 p.m., Honey's 10-year-old Lexus was parked in Jack Kay's spot at Apotex. At 5 p.m., Barry, Honey, and 3 contractors from Brennan Homes were in the small boardroom by the reception area. This was a personal meeting to discuss their plans to build a $30 million house in the Forest Hill neighborhood. The meeting was to discuss doors. Honey wanted French doors on the patio. Barry wanted sliding doors. Barry got his way. This meeting was supposed to be at Old Connolly Road, but for a reason that nobody seemed to be able to recall, it was moved to Apotex. At 6:15 p.m., security video in the foyer of Apotex shows the builders and Honey leaving separately. Honey had a brief call with her sister Mary. Honey suggested that she would drop by Mary's that evening before going home, but Mary wasn't feeling well, so they decided to catch up the following week in Florida, and that haunts Mary to this day. From Apotex, Honey headed to Bayview Village Shopping Mall to buy presents. Her phone records show that during the drive, she called a good friend to check in on her husband who had just recently had an operation. This friend said that Honey sounded completely normal. She arrived at Bayview Village around 7 p.m. At the time, the mall didn't have its own security cameras in the common areas, but cameras at 2 places picked up Honey. She went to a cosmetics store and also to the bank. It was after hours, only the ATM was accessible. Later, the police forensics team would find $7,500 in Honey's wallet. Just before 8 p.m., Honey got back into her Lexus and headed home. At the time, the Bayview Village Mall didn't have security cameras outside, so there's no video record of this. It's a 5-minute drive from Bayview to Old Connolly Road. Honey would have arrived home around 8:20, and she always parked her SUV just to the right of the side door. She went in the side door, like she always did, and it is believed that is where she was attacked. I think we can safely say that Honey did get in the house before she was attacked because photos that would later be released or unsealed would show that she had time to neatly lay her packages on the table just inside the door, and she also had time to lay her purse neatly on the chair to the table. It is believed that she was then attacked, but that she got away. It is believed that she ran, probably trying to get to the front door. Her phone fell and landed on the floor of the powder room / bathroom by the front doors. And her friends say Honey never used this bathroom, and the front doors to the house were hardly ever opened. It is not known if Honey was rendered unconscious on the main floor and taken downstairs, or if she was murdered on the main floor and then taken downstairs. But investigators do believe that she may have been murdered on the main level. I have no idea why they think this, but it is believed that she was attacked seconds or minutes after she entered the house. Barry sent his last email from his computer at Apotex at 8:23 p.m. to Jack K. Normally, Barry stayed at Apotex until 10 or 11 o'clock p.m., but for some reason he left earlier that night. One of the builders recalled Barry saying that he had to go home early, but the builder couldn't remember the reason. Old Connolly Road is less than a 20-minute drive from Apotex at that time of night, so Barry was home before 9 p.m. He drove his car into the ramp down into the underground garage. He pulled his car right up to a wall of curved glass, block glass, the stuff that was used back in the 1980s. And on the other side of this glass block wall was the pool and the long hallway leading to the pool. People assumed that whoever had killed Barry had seen that he was coming home and waited in the hallway, and they could see his headlights coming in from that glass wall. When he came through the garage door to the hallway, that's when they got him, and that's when his gloves, documents, and phone fell to the ground. At 8:30 the next morning, Thursday, December 14th, Honey was supposed to be at a board meeting for one of the charities that she supported, but she just didn't show up. And Barry didn't show up to the office at Apotex. There's emails, texts, and phone calls that were coming into the couple on Thursday and into Friday, but of course they were not responding. So people were surprised at the silence from Barry and Honey, but nobody took any action. Not only did Barry not show up at his office at Apotex, his lawyer also found it odd not to hear from him, but he also didn't do anything. Now Barry's schedule was kept by Joanne Morrow, his personal assistant at Apotex. She has said that Barry came and went as he pleased. She thought maybe with the arrival of his newest grandchild that he was visiting the grandkids, which is something that he did sometimes in the afternoon. According to his personal assistant, it wasn't really out of the norm for Barry not to be in the office. I find this comment strange, since it is the total opposite of what everyone else has said, but okay. Jeremy Desai, the CEO of Apotex, was also wondering where Barry was that Thursday. He'd sent emails and not heard back, and that was highly unusual. Barry was known to respond to emails ASAP. As the day passed, Jeremy Desai said that he got very worried too because it was very unusual for Barry not to respond, but still he took no action. Jonathan sent an email Thursday asking his father if he'd come to a staff Christmas party for his storage company, with no reply. Alexandra sent photos of her children on Thursday by text, with no reply. On Friday, she tried to touch base with her parents about that planned Hanukkah dinner that was to be held at her house that night, and daughters Lauren and Kaylin both called Barry on Friday. No answer, no reply. Now, Kevin Donovan of the Toronto Star, who's done extensive investigation on this case and has a podcast and a documentary and has written a book, called the couple of days surrounding the murders as the perfect storm. And I would have to agree. Nobody was due to be at the Shermans the Thursday after the murder. I think most importantly, Jack K was away. And it's been said that if he was in the office and Barry hadn't shown up, he would have taken action. He was one of Barry's closest friends, and they had worked together for more than 35 years, and he would have recognized Barry's absence as strange. Remember, Jack was in New York with his wife. Honey's assistant, Sheila Stanley, was also off that Thursday and Friday. Obviously, she would have noticed as well if Honey wasn't around. I think whoever did this had knowledge not only of the Sherman schedule, but knew that Jack was out of town and that Honey's assistant was also out of town. And nobody was scheduled to come to the house that Thursday, making it the perfect time to strike. The contractor that had been in the house the day the bodies were found had been working in the room right next to the pool. Little did he know that right behind the glass wall were Barry and Honey Sherman. He said nobody used that pool and that he had stopped servicing it years before. He also said that day something was off. Something just didn't feel right. The housekeeper had said when she entered the house, there was a blackness. Something heavy was in the air. Barry and Honey were found at the far end of the pool room at the end of the pool, in seated positions facing away from the pool. They were both held up with belts that were around their necks and fastened to a low pool railing. Both were reclined back at the waists and their arms were at their sides. If the belts had not been holding them up, both Shermans would have fallen backwards into the pool. Both were wearing their clothes. Honey's head was not much more than a foot above the pool deck, whereas Barry's back was against a railing support, so he was more upright. Looking in from the pool room door, Honey was closest and Barry was on her other side. Just look at the drawing from the Toronto Star. What a weird way to be positioned, especially Honey. It looks so unnatural. What did it mean? Did it mean anything? Was the couple strangled by the belts that held them up? Did they off themselves in one of the weirdest ways possible? Okay, so let's describe Barry and how he was found. He was held up by the belt that he had been wearing that morning, actually. His feet were neatly crossed at the ankles, and his glasses were perfectly perched on his nose. Brian Greenspan, who was the Sherman family lawyer for a time, saw the photos and said that Barry's jacket was pulled slightly behind his back, which he thought would have prevented the use of his arms. His shirt tails, which he always tucked in neatly, were loose. Otherwise, Barry's body bore no outward signs of violence, but Honey's did. There was a mark on one of her cheeks, but it was minor. There was blood on her face. She did have a cut on her right cheek where she was struck in the face, and there was dried and mottled blood on her face. Based on this mottling, investigators believed that a plastic bag may have been put over her head at some point to stop the blood from either getting on the killer's clothes or other parts of the house maybe, and then removed. But no bag was found at the crime scene, and Honey's shoes, which were open back, were still on her feet. It is unclear where the belt around Honey's neck came from. There's blood on the jacket Honey was wearing near her right elbow, which is resting on the pool deck. There's also blood on Barry's right pant leg near the ankle, and there was also a bloody smudge mark on the railing near where the belt around Honey's neck was tied. Sources say that based on an examination of the crime scene, it is most likely that the Shermans were not killed in the spot where they were found. One theory is that Honey was surprised on the main floor when she arrived home that night, killed there, and then brought to the basement swimming pool room. Investigators theorize that Honey was put in position first, and then Barry was lifted over her by the killers, getting blood, possibly from the injury to Honey on his pant legs in the process. They theorize that one of the killers had blood on his hand when he moved Barry into place. Investigators theorize that Barry was carried by two people, but possibly just one of the attackers dragged Honey with the soles of her shoes, or the heels of her shoes, which made a faint drag mark in the dust that was on the floor. Police have said they learned nothing forensically from the crime scene, so I'm assuming the bloodstains and smudges all came from Honey because Barry was not bleeding. Whatever forensic testing the police have done remains sealed and is not publicly known. Now the belts. In both cases, the strap was slipped through the buckle. This was looped around their necks and tightened. Then the strap end was tied around the low railing above. But the belts were both tied in different ways. Barry's belt, a plain black belt, was looped only one time around the railing and tied. But the belt around Honey's neck was wrapped 3 times around the railing. And also, the direction that the belts were tied was opposite. This led investigators to theorize that one was tied by a right-handed person and the other by a left-handed person. As to the belt around Honey's neck, it was much longer than the belt that was around Barry's neck. And unlike Barry's plain black belt, the belt that was around Honey's neck had a pattern in the leather. Now, one thing that I did want to point out about the crime scene, too, is that many people have said that the bodies eerily resembled 2 life-size sculptures, human-shaped art figures, in a basement room near the crime scene. Now, does that mean anything? I have no idea. A few hours before the murders went public, news reached SureFam, the headquarters of the family holding company and the center of Barry's financial universe. Alex Glassenberg, the president of SureFam, was handpicked by Barry and had worked for the family for decades. He answered his cell phone, then quickly left. Glassenberg was the one person in the world who knew as much about Barry's financial empire as Barry did. He told no one in his 10-person office. He just got up from his desk, put on his coat, and left. This was not a time for the telephone. Bankers and lawyers needed to be informed privately. That Friday morning, December 15th, 2017, Jonathan was in his driveway to his cottage on Chandos Lake taking a delivery of furniture when his phone rang. It was his Aunt Mary calling from Florida. She had just heard from the real estate agent about finding Barry and Honey. She was slightly hysterical and told Jonathan that his parents had been murdered. Jonathan and his Aunt Mary got word out to the rest of the family, who all agreed to meet up at Alexandra's house. At Alexandra's house, it was a chaotic scene. Alexandra with a newborn that she was trying to settle. Kaylin, the youngest, was walking around stunned. She told people she was going to buy a car because her father, who had opposed the purchase, now would want her to do it. Aunt Mary, who had chartered a private jet home from Florida, arriving screaming and sobbing and a little bit tipsy, and telling anyone who would listen that Honey had promised her $300 million. She would later say that the real number was $500 million, but she thought saying $300 million would be easier for the family to swallow. Jonathan walked in the door crying out, "Oh my God, oh my God," and threw himself to the floor, asking someone to bring him a drink. A bottle of scotch was produced. Lauren arrived from a trip to Mexico the next day. She was heard to say, well, if it had to happen, it was not the worst time in their lives to be murdered. They had finally gotten to know my son. Jack Kay was also there. Everybody was trying to figure out what was going on when they realized that Honey had missed a meeting the morning before, Thursday, and that Barry hadn't shown up to the office that Thursday either. Everyone started looking back through texts and emails and calls when they realized that nobody had received a response from Barry or Honey since Wednesday. This was Friday. Jack had had the last exchange with Barry on the Wednesday night when Barry sent him an email at 8:23 p.m. A detective from the Toronto Police Services showed up at Alexandra's that night and told the family that they didn't have any information, but that they would be in touch. Allegedly, the family, well, Alexandra, anyways, was upset that the detective showed up and didn't even take his coat off to sit with them. And by this point, the family was starting to hear rumors that the police thought that this was a murder-suicide. That upset the Sherman children because they knew it was bullshit. Their parents had all kinds of plans. They were going to Florida, they had a new grandchild, there were no signs that anything was wrong. Within a day, security guards with combat training arrived to protect the 4 executors of Barry's estate and family members. These executors, or trustees of Barry's estate, were Jonathan Sherman, his son, Alex Glassenberg, the president of SureFam, Jack Kay, Barry's second-in-command at Apotex, and Brad Krawcheck, who worked for SureFam and was also Alexandra's husband at the time. Hey everybody, I just wanted to pop on here to say thank you for all the support. Please make sure that you keep an eye out for and tune in to part 2 of the unsolved murders of Barry and Honey Sherman. It still blows me away that anybody would want to help out, so for anyone that would like to make a donation, I have added a PayPal link on my YouTube page. Again, it is very much appreciated. It really does take a lot of time to put these stories and videos together. You can follow Unjust Crimes on Facebook and Instagram, and I will put those links in the description to the video. With all of that business out of the way, please do give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. And until next time, thank you for your time and stay safe out there.